Hello, hello. Thank you so much for taking a few minutes to meet with us. We're excited to share with you these ideas around how to measure your experiential reach, the people that you're trying to get to at these events. And there's all these questions that come up, and there's all these efforts and money that's spent on making sure you got counts of that. So you've got something to put in your recap report. And one of the most common questions that we get after folks have invested in these large systems is, what kind of questions should I be collecting? What kind of metrics should I be collecting? We're going to provide to you a list. If you go to portmod.net/metrics, you can get the list I'm going to review here. But I want to share with you what those metrics might be. Now, there's a set of standardized metrics that we're going to recommend, and you're not going to use all of them all the time. There's going to be a certain number of them that are relevant for you in your program. But having that standardized list allows you to go back to something with each campaign year over year. It allows you to create some consistencies in training materials, in forms for data entry from the field staff. All those things start to become standardized. And then the way in which you analyze and get insights from that information starts to become standardized. And overall, the organization thrives, and you get better at reading data, better at understanding what's working, what's not working. And that starts with having a core set of metrics for field staff to provide feedback on. That's what we're going to share with you today. Now, this is within a broader context of experiential ROI, and what field staff give you is the information around the quantity of your reach and sometimes the quality of that reach. But that's only one part of what we would say is three parts. So you've got to get a clear measure of reach, but you also want a clear measure of impact, and you want a measure of value or return on investment. And so what I want to do is I want to walk you through the model that outlines those three areas and how you answer those questions in a cohesive way. I'll do that very briefly, 5 minutes or so, and then we'll jump into those 20 metrics, or the metrics that are going to be relevant that you need to pick from when designing a campaign. So let's start by taking a look at the overall model to begin with. And as I mentioned, there are three basic questions that you want to be able to answer. There's this area of reach, impact, and value. And that first one is all about reach. And I would describe that as, how often are you reaching the right consumer? It's got a how often, so it's that quality component, quantity component, but it's also the right consumer, which is that quality component. The second question is this idea of, when is the campaign creating intent where it didn't previously exist? You've got to get some kind of impact measure, some kind of leading indicator of sales, or something that shows you how you've moved people through the purchase cycle in a way that's going to lead to a revenue generating event. There's lots of ways to measure that and to do it very simply. And that's a key part of the formula, but not what we'll focus on too much today. And then there's this idea of value. So under what circumstances is ROI highest? That's that third key question. And we want to understand return on investment. And I'll show you exactly how to measure that with your experiential in a second. But you also want to understand how that ROI varies, because once you get that initial percentage, that initial number of return, you're going to find that other than it being positive or negative, it's not very actionable. But when you can segment it by the things you did, then it becomes incredibly actionable, because you have the ability to do more of what's working, less of what's not. And you're really kind of deploying, in that sense, a macro A/B split test. And so this third question is very key to doing that properly. When we look at ROI, we start with the number of engagements we receive, and you've probably seen this before, so I'm going to move quickly through it. But if you have questions about this model, you don't hesitate to reach out to us. We'll be happy to walk you through it in more detail and talk to you about it in more detail. We're at portmod.com if you're interested in that kind of connection. So you've got 90 engagements. You've got a measure of your percent that are on target. If it was 90% on target, you'd have 81 people that were the kind of consumer you were trying to reach. You need to have that measure of non-customer status, where they are in that purchase cycle. If they're not a customer, they represent an opportunity for incremental. And if the 81% were non-customers, we'd have about 66 people that were leaving the event that were the kind of people we were trying to reach, and they represented an opportunity for incremental revenue. We get some kind of leading indicator of their purchase behavior. Purchase intent is a perfectly reasonable way to do it. If that purchase intent was 78%, then we're left with about 51 people leaving that event from the original 90. who are saying, at least they're saying they're going to buy, who probably wouldn't have purchased otherwise. Now, people don't always do what they say they're going to do. There's a lot of different models to calculate what is the actual buying behavior. And when we look at, in this example, if 44% were actually purchasing, we'd have 23 estimated new customers. Now, that 23 of 90 gives us that conversion metric, but also those 23 in and of themselves, they have value, and I can divide that value by what I spent for that hypothetical day of activity, and then start to segment how that varied across my campaign. So, for example, if I am at festivals, retail events, and community events, I may find that even though I'm paying a lot more money for that sponsorship fee for the festival, it's far outperforming my community events. And because that ROI model is based on the decisions that you made to design the campaign, because it's based on where you went, your venue selection, how much money you put into the volume of people you were getting to, whether they were the right kind of person, and if you had an impact on them, and then what you spent to do that. All of that is well within your control. And when you build an ROI model around the things that are within your control, that ROI becomes actionable. Here's that example where festivals, I may have good reasons to be at those community events, but I know that if I'm looking for value, if I'm looking for incremental revenue, I'm getting upwards of 3 times that return at festivals versus those community events. We see this kind of variation by market because every brand has different levels of historical, competitive, and marketing spend in that market. So that's going to have a lot of variation. And even by the kind of person that you're talking to. So you may have a target consumer. Maybe for this campaign, we were targeting women over 40, and they sure enough delivered a very strong return. That differentiates from men pretty significantly, who were showing a much lower return. But women under 40 were not delivering a negative return on investment. They were still of value to the brand. And this kind of information allows your ROI to be actionable. Now, it starts with those 90 engagements, that first measure. And what you're doing is you are collecting a record or the history of what that day of activation was all about. And oftentimes we start and finish with just that engagement count. And that is a shame, because a lot we can do with that information, that with other metrics that we get. You do need to be standardized. You want to keep it simple. And that's why we have these 20 metrics. Let me review those with you. You have metrics around the event itself. So what was the actual dynamics around what you had signed up to do and be at? And then what did you do on site when you were there? If you have the opportunity to collect leads or to sell, you want to have measures of that. You want to have some kind of record of what you were, what that resulted in. There is an opportunity to get qualitative feedback from brand ambassadors, and there's 3 key questions that we've found extremely helpful. I want to share those with you, and if appropriate, you can include those. And then finally, there are metrics about the program or the brand itself that you want to have standardized for the record. Those become key when classifying your information, but also when doing the ROI calculations, and most specifically getting at that customer value measure. So I want to share what those metrics are as well. Now, the first one is the event itself, and there's 3 key metrics that I want you to be able to record for those events. The first is the venue you were at, like Daytona 500. It would be the actual name of the venue you were at. If you have a wrapped vehicle, you want to get a starting and ending odometer reading. That's not only going to help you with your DOT logs and your compliance in that area, it's also going to allow you to calculate your mileage and or have your number of miles driven. And then when you have the number of miles driven, you can take advantage of measures of impressions per all-purpose vehicle mile that you can include in your reporting. Impressions have value through add value equivalency and different types of approaches to that. And so we can bring that value into that dollar value into the ROI models. You spend a lot of money on that wrapped vehicle, so let's get the full benefit of what that money delivered back for you. And then you also want to make sure you have event date. It's not uncommon for us to see people that collect data on a date range. So let's say if you're at the Albuquerque Balloon Festival and it runs for 9 days, you'll have the start date and the end date. That's unfortunate because you really want to collect information at the daily level, and that'll make more sense in a few minutes when I explain why. It's always going to be much more accurate as well when you collect at the daily level. Now, I know there's a lot of information on the screen here. If you do reach out to us and you want to connect, we'd be happy to send you this presentation so you have these details as a follow-up. And the best way to connect with us is portma.net/metrics. It'll give you the overview, a one-pager of these metrics, and then give us a chance to connect, and we can get this document over to you overall. So those are the first three for the event itself. There's activation hours, start time and end time. There's staff that are on site, and then there's the attendance at the venue. Now, the activation hours are really critical because you want to get the consumer-facing time. When did you start facing consumers, and when did you finish your consumer-facing time? That may be, let's say, 10 hours. Now, you might be at the venue for 12 hours because you've got load in and load out, but you don't want to count that. You want to count just the consumer-facing time. This isn't a timesheet equivalent. This isn't a replacement for your staff timesheet. It's the time that you open the doors to the time that you close the doors for consumer interaction. And then you want to get average staff per day. Ideally, it's the actual number of the number of staff that were on site. If you had different staff coming and going throughout the day, so you get different levels of staffing, you can use an average for that day. Now, what you've got to do when you are comparing events is you've got to multiply the hours you are activating by the number of staff, and so you get a count of hours, of consumer-facing hours. And then you divide your interactions, you divide your interactions by those consumer-facing hours, and that's going to give you a standardized measure of engagements per hour. And when you're looking at your recap reporting and you're trying to decide about efficiency overall and which events were delivering more interactions than others, the only way you can do that is not by day, because every day, every event type is going to have different numbers of staff required oftentimes, and will have different hours of activation. So you've got to get that standardized measure of event staff times hours of activation, and then you divide your interaction count by that, so you can understand the number of interactions per day as an average interactions per hour, and then compare that across events. So then you can start to see, hey, this state or this festival activation was giving me 109 engagements per hour, whereas that community event, same staffing, same hours, was giving me 11 engagements per hour. And that's part of the reason why they both had the same impact, why my ROI was so much higher at the festival. That kind of insight is powerful because you have control over it. But if you're not standardizing how you're measuring interactions per hour, then you're going to fall short. And what we find very common when we're looking at this data is that agencies and brands are measuring interactions per day without this kind of standardization, and it's really useless data. You're fooling yourself to think you're going to see anything in that. So those two metrics become critical, and then we also want to have average attendance at the venue. This is oftentimes hard to calculate. The press are pretty good at it. Local law enforcement, typically there are ordinances at the county or city level that require for every so many people at a venue, there has to be this number of officers on site. And so they tend to be pretty good at calculating and getting real numbers. The venue manager is often going to inflate their numbers a little bit, so take that into account. But if you want to use if you want to include impressions, like we'd recommend you would, it's got to start with a measure of attendance that day, so you can get a sense of who's seeing the experience on site. So we got those metrics on the event itself. Those collectively define the event itself, so you have that record of where you went. The next is what you did when you were there, and what you did when you were there starts with the interaction count. It has an engagement count. It has the premiums and collateral that you distributed. Now, interactions versus engagements are different things, and this is often mixed up when people are recording their information. They're recording their data for a day of activity. So interactions are the number of people that you engaged. Engagements are the number of things you did with those people. So you might have 1,200 or 2,140 interactions, but you might have distributed 1,910 samples and done 230 demonstrations. So understanding that variation is going to be really important. You don't want to add your samples to your demonstrations because you're going to be overcounting interactions. But you also want to make sure you know the number of people that you engage, because they represent the base of where you have an opportunity for incremental revenue. And then you're oftentimes distributing premiums, you're distributing collateral or flyers. Premiums can be looked at as being samples. You want to get counts of that. I can look at it as being any branded area, any branded tchotchke or the like. And then if you're handing out flyers, you want to get a record of that as well. This is not only helpful for you to be able to demonstrate what you did and how that volume differs by event, because when you're trying to figure out what worked more than another, but it also gives you that double of managing inventory. And so you can look at your run rates and find out, hey, if I'm averaging 100 distributed per event and I've got 10 events planned, I should have 1,000 in inventory. And if it's now day 3 and I'm distributing, instead of 100 per event, I'm distributing 200 per event, you can look at your run rate and realize you're going to run out by day 5 unless you buy more premiums or change your activation strategy. And so that kind of management of inventory is really helpful, but it also gives you data information about what you did with consumers to generate some kind of response. So that's the way you would assess what you did on site with your actual activity. Now, if your event had the opportunity to collect leads or to sell, there are 4 metrics we'd recommend that you take into consideration for that. There is the lead by product. So what were you, if you had multiple things on site that you could be collecting a lead about, you want to have that segmented as such. If you are selling a product that is purchased by household as opposed to purchased by individual, then it's very important for you to be recording a household measure as well. So you might have engaged 2 people at a home show, but they represent the same home, and you're looking at the possibility of selling siding to that family. You're marketing a siding product, and that's only going to be 1 sale. It's not going to be 2 sales as a potential for incremental revenue. So you want to, when that's relevant, you want to be able to distinguish between that. And then when you're talking about sales, it's the same thing. When you're talking about the ability of selling a product like hand sales on site, it's by product or it's by household, depending on the category that you're activating in. A lot of definitions up here on the screen. I know you probably find it helpful to have that yourself. Just reach out to us. Go to portma.net/metrics or reach out otherwise at portma.com, and we'd be happy to schedule a time to chat and get this over to you. The last one is brand ambassador feedback, and this is often overlooked. You want to minimize the open-ended responses that you're asking brand ambassadors to provide you, because open-ended responses are always high maintenance. But there are some insights that they have that can be incredibly valuable when you're designing your status report. You're looking to get some explanation of why things were so different. And there's 3 key questions that we think are solid in that area. And it's simply what worked, what didn't work, and what are you hearing? What are consumer comments or opinions? What worked is designed in and of itself to be anecdotal. You want them to give you information on what their opinion is, their perspective is. You'll find all kinds of things that come out of that. Some of it will be obvious. Many times the obvious isn't all that apparent. And so getting this kind of feedback from brand ambassadors for every day of activity becomes really useful. And then when you're sitting down to write your recap and you've calculated your averages and you're looking at that variability between festivals and community events, for example, on average engagements per hour, and you're trying to figure out what is going on, it's so helpful to read 20, 30 comments around what the people on the street are saying worked. It gives you a lot of insight into how to get the most out of that reporting. And then also what didn't work, and you're going to get anecdotal information that's similar. You get both sides of the spectrum. When you're seeing a big spike in engagements per hour, as an example, then you can look at that what worked to find out what was going on. If it was much lower than expected or lower than compared to last year or lower versus your benchmarks, then you can use that information of what didn't work to pull that out. And this is the most common that we see most people doing. They tend to not do the other 2, but this third one of consumer comments, objections is useful. It's the kind of thing that oftentimes doesn't have a lot of actionability, but brand managers absolutely love it. And it's great to put these kind of quotes as call outs into reports and just kind of sprinkle it through your recap. And they're feel good measures. And so why ignore it? If you can get this third question and get your brand ambassadors to provide some kind of feedback in this area, there's a lot you can do with it. So you might as well have it. And so finally, the last thing I want to share with you is the program itself, or the brand metrics itself. There are some things you want to record And a lot of this comes from mistakes we see people make. So we want to give you these metrics. Keep in mind that those other 4 categories, those are things that you're asking your field staff or your manager on site, one of your field staff, to provide for that day of activity for every day. So it's reported daily. Whereas this 5th category, the brand program metrics, those are more of a one-off. They're program-based, so you're just recording them a single time, and it'll remain true throughout all of your activation days, whether it's 1 day or 1,000 days. So those brand metrics, we'll start there, and then we'll talk about the core program metrics. The first thing is you want to record that brand name, and it seems so simple, but when you're looking back at your data 2 years down the road, and you're trying to figure out, like, what did we do and who did we do it with? What we see as the most common challenge is that the full brand or SKU level name isn't used in the records. And it brings a lot of ambiguity when you're trying to get that secondary value from your data down the road, or when you're trying to compare last year to this year. So for example, instead of saying simply, we would say simply orange with mango. If we were sampling simply orange with mango, that's what we want. We want to get that full name in there. And then also you want to classify your program by industry, so that you have the ability to start to look at trends by industry. So you can start to look at, when I am doing, when I'm sampling potato chips, is it all that different at a festival? Is it all that different than when I'm sampling orange juice at a festival? Am I getting consistently the same rate, or do they vary? And that not only helps you understand a festival as a point of distribution, but it also helps you understand different kinds of event setups, different types of scenarios, and different categories of food, and how people may be responding to them at different kinds of venues. And so by simply having this measure now, as you accumulate data over time and your own institutional knowledge grows because of that data being standardized, industry becomes very relevant and valuable. So you'll find that most of your clients are thinking about their business in a standardized indexing system called the North American Industry Classification System, NAICS. It's what's used by the census, by the U.S. Census. You can go to it as a free resource at census.gov/NAICS, and you can get those industry classifications. We also have a version of this that we use that's a little bit more applicable for experiential. We'd be happy to share that with you if it's relevant. And it allows you to do that kind of that classification. But a good starting point is the NAICS, because it's going to be what your clients know and what they're used to. So when you're talking back to the industry or writing your white papers or doing any of that kind of work, you are doing so in the context that brand managers have been trained to think about the way their category or subcategory operates. There's also some core metrics around the brand that you want to get in order to be able to calculate your return on investment. And you're calculating return on investment. One of the key measures I had showed you in that quick model, we got to 23 estimated new customers. We got to apply a value to that, a dollar value to those 23 people. And we do that by getting an annualized or a lifetime customer value. We have an earlier LinkedIn Live, and we've got some materials to help you calculate that customer value if you're not familiar with it. But these are the core metrics you need to get and need to have. And again, it's you only got to collect it once. And once you have it archived, you can start to use it for that program. But having these metrics consistently across all your activations are going to be really helpful. You got to know what you're selling at the SKU level. So what's that price per SKU? You want to understand how many times that SKU is purchased per year. So we know people are shopping for insurance every 7 years. They're buying a car every 5 years. They're buying rice every 2 weeks. They're buying bread and milk twice a week. So every product that we purchase has a different purchase cycle or rate at which it's purchased on a typical basis. And you want to understand what that is for, what your assumptions are around what that is for at the SKU level, so that you can get those number of buys per year in your calculation. If you're doing lifetime value, year-over-year loyalty is important. It can be estimated. It also can come out of the way you treat your survey research on site. It's a very simple measure. It's just how you think about that measure to get that period of loyalty. Now, if the client doesn't have this data, then AI is a fantastic tool. It used to take us a lot of work to do the secondary industry research to get this information. But a simple prompt into any AI engine, I'd recommend something like proximity. Is it proximity? I think it's proximity. Gosh, I'm spacing on it right in this moment. But there's one AI engine that's really good at citing its sources, and you want to be able to cite your sources when you're quoting something back to your brand team or to higher ups. So a prompt like this is going to be really useful. If you said something like, "Hey, you're a market researcher researching the orange juice industry in the United States, and are looking to identify the average either price per SKU, buys per year, years of loyalty." You want to do different prompts for each. For a typical consumer purchasing orange juice on a grocery store shopping trip for household use, please list the top 3 average SKU prices in descending order and cite your sources. Please provide your results in a table format. And so you're being very specific about what you're asking. You'll be able to get that secondary research from the industry or from associations or wherever it exists out in the world, and look at it, assess the quality of those resources, take your average among the 3, and then use that as your baseline for calculating for recording these metrics and then calculating your ROI. And then finally, this program budget. You're going to have that budget that you're going to use to define divide your revenue estimate, so you can get a sense of what that percentage is. Sometimes people ask us what they should have in that budget. We've got some more comprehensive budgeting tools that are available. In fact, if you go to resources at portma.com, you'll see all these different tools available for you for download. And one of them is a budgeting tool that has more details around the budgeting. But basically, you're bringing in your venue and sponsorship fees, you're bringing in your staffing costs, your agency fees. Sometimes there's reasons to not include sample based on how the client thinks about, how the brand team thinks about sampling and samples. But most of the time, sampling costs are brought in there. Hard costs, like if you've got a vehicle that you purchased instead of leased, or if you got event set items that could be used year over year, you can amortize them on the same schedule you would for taxes. So you don't have to include 100% of that vehicle purchase in year 1 if you plan to use it for 4 or 5 years. And then if you're bringing in media impressions into your model, you want to include media spend. If you are not including media impressions in your ROI model, then you can exclude media spend. But these are the core metrics you're going to need for budget to get your budget. Really, you should have your budget segmented by market and venue. So when you're looking at that festival versus community event, you can do that specific math to figure it out. When you don't have that, then you can just divide number of event days by your total budget and get an average cost per event day and use that. Sometimes that's going to mess up your ROI a little bit, but most of the time it's going to be absolutely fine. So those are the metrics that we're going to recommend you collect. I'm going to encourage you to go to portma.net/metrics so that you can get that list that I just provided to you. If this deck itself with all those definitions and examples are going to be helpful, then reach out to us and we would love to connect and get you that additional information. Thank you so much for joining me. It's 9:30. I hope you have a fantastic day, and I look forward to seeing you next time we're doing one of these events. Take care. Bye-bye.